Welcome. Today we're going to talk about the respiratory system. You could also refer to this as the pulmonary system, and you will hear it referred to that. If you think back to our work with the cardiovascular system, you will remember that there was a vessel. There's two vessels, the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein, that connect the heart to the lungs. So that word pulmonary refers to the lungs and the respiratory system. So if you think about breathing right now, you are sitting and you are probably not that active. So your respiratory rate is a lot lower than it would be if you were outside running. So on average, every minute you breathe 12 to 16 times a minute. Anything that's higher than that could be a sign that something else is going on. And you may have experienced this. If you get nervous for any reason or anxious, your respiratory rate would pick up. There's a reason for that, and your body can respond to what it perceives as a dangerous stimuli, and it can respond in a way to prepare yourself in case you needed to run. Great evolutionary advantage in the past for our ancestors who might need to dash away quickly, but for now it feels kind of weird to sit in a classroom breathing heavily when you're not doing anything. But anyway, how does the air get from our atmosphere into our body? And if you think about the role of the respiratory system, we're trying to deliver air to all of the we're trying to deliver oxygen to all of the cells in our body. So how does our body do that? Let's take a look at it. There's a few main components that we're going to learn about today, just so that you become familiar with their terms and that you can think about the path that oxygen and carbon dioxide take in and out of the body. So the first step, you're all familiar, your nasal cavity and your your nasal cavity and your mouth are the entrance points to allow gas exchange in your body. And really, nasal cavity is the preference, but the mouth has been a backup system for our body, which is perfect. Air is going to travel through the nasal cavity to the pharynx, and that is really what we would call the throat. From there, this isn't shown on here, but you actually have a flap called an epiglottis that is going to direct where air is going, and it also helps to prevent food or water from going down into our respiratory system, because as you know, we take in not only air through our mouth, but we also take in water and all the food that we eat. So our body has a natural way of directing air to the proper location. Once air gets into the respiratory system, it's going to go into our larynx. And if you've ever heard of laryngitis, this is the part of your respiratory system that is infected. And that is also known as your vocal cords. So the larynx is where air passes through to create the sound that we have as our voice. Air is also going to travel down the trachea. If you've ever said, "Oh, I just swallowed air down the wrong pipe," you could actually fix that and say, "I just put air down my trachea," I just put water down my trachea, which isn't the place I want water to go. So your trachea is also known as your windpipe, and that directs air into your bronchi, which is your tube, your bronchus, and that bronchus is going to break up into two branches. These branches are called bronchi, which are plural for bronchus, and those branches break up into smaller branches of tubes. These are really just tubes in your body to deliver air or to move air into your lungs. And so your lungs you have a left lung and you have a right lung. And the whole point of your lungs is to provide surface area for gas exchange to occur between your circulatory system and your respiratory system. So once air moves into our bronchioles, it is going to get to the ends. And on the very ends, which you cannot see here, are little sacs that kind of look like grapes, bunches of grapes. And those are called alveoli. At the bottom of your chest, below your rib cage, you have something called the diaphragm, and that's going to have a very important role in helping us to inhale and exhale, and that is what helps change the volume of your lungs to bring air in and out. So let's take a closer look. Just as you know, your nose is where air is filtered in and out. You have hairs there to help block the incoming pathogens. Think back to your immune system. You have mucus in there and cilia to help prevent pathogens from entering your immune system. Anytime you have an opening, that's a perfect place for pathogens to enter. So we have to have barriers there to prevent anything from going in. And you can really see the path of air going down your pharynx into your larynx into your trachea, into your bronchioles and bronchi, and then into your lungs. And this is such a great image here showing the diaphragm and how this little layer of muscle sits below your lungs. Here is a closer look at your larynx. This is your voice box, and on the outside of your trachea, you're going to see a whole bunch of cartilage, and that cartilage is there to provide stabilization and to keep your trachea open. You have your bronchus here, the primary, because it is the first time they're branching out, and those are also surrounded by cartilage. And then as you get down deeper into your lungs, they start branching out into secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, and at the end you have these little branches that really take up so much of your lung. Those are your bronchioles that do not have cartilage. And then at the very end, you have your alveolus. So if we're talking about one of these little air sacs down here, we would call it an alveolus, but the collective group of them are alveoli. You have so many alveoli in your lungs. In your lungs, they're not filled with air necessarily. They're kind of like a sponge that's filled with air. These are the spongy parts that fill up with air. And they have a really crucial role in helping to bring oxygen into the blood. So we will get to that in a moment. This is a diagram you may have. So if you need to pause this and record down the names of any of these parts of your respiratory system, these are the portions that I'm asking you to make sure you know. What is not labeled. This would also be a really good time for you to do some quizzing. Do you know the parts? Can you start to memorize the parts? Because you will be responsible for those. Now let's take a closer look at the alveoli. So this is what the structure of an alveoli looks like. And if you notice on here, you have these little capillaries that surround each of the alveoli. Those capillaries are color-coded for different reasons. And unfortunately, I want to put a big X through this one. I don't like the colors that they chose for this, but I thought it helped really clearly show the different components, having it hand-drawn. This is the model I'd like you to look at. And the reason why is it's clearly labeling and showing the deoxygenated blood, the blood that has a lot of carbon dioxide coming from the heart into the lungs. And you can see how this arteriole branches up into capillaries, and those capillaries are surrounding each alveoli. At the end, you see them change colors, and if you remember, that actually indicates that there's now oxygen. Does that really happen in real life? No, you don't have a color change like that. It's just that in this model, we are symbolizing oxygenated blood with the red color. And so once blood has picked up oxygen, it's going to flow back out into the venule, and eventually it'll form with the vein and go back into the pulmonary vein into the heart. So this is really the connection point of where the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system come together and have gas exchange. This happens through the process of diffusion, where you have high concentration of O2 in the blood, diffusing out into the alveoli. And then the alveoli, which have a lot of oxygen, are going to put that oxygen into the capillaries through diffusion, and then that oxygen can be carried back into the heart. Now, what happens with all that CO2 that was just put into the alveoli? Well, if you think back to, if you go back here, once you have CO2 in the alveoli, carbon dioxide, it needs to go back out into the atmosphere. We need to exhale that CO2 because it's a waste. And in our next lesson, you're going to see how we actually cause inhalation and exhalation and how we exhale all that gas. But the important part is understanding that you are bringing oxygen in through the bronchioles into the alveoli, and then that oxygen gets diffused into the blood through capillaries, and which are carried back into the heart to then be pumped to the rest of the body. So again, take a moment on here to pause and write down the labels for this area and ask me any questions that you may have. All right, next time we meet, we will talk about how you actually inhale and exhale.